Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first Monkswell Literary Festival. We're delighted today to have a very, very special guest speaker who's come to join us all the way from the United States, Director of the Moynihan Studies Institute at Syracuse University, Professor Glyn Morgan.
82 years ago, yesterday, was the anniversary of the D-Day invasions. I don't know whether you saw the news this morning, but our Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, gave a speech yesterday at the D-Day celebrations. And at the D-Day celebrations yesterday, he drew a contrast between the heroism of the 1944 generation and today. And he said, back in 1944, there was a unified opposition to fascist ideology seeking to take over Europe. And unfortunately, today, there is no unified opposition to another equally dangerous ideology that is being introduced to Europe by mass migration. And he said that the threat posed by mass migration is of comparable danger to Europe as the fascist ideology of 1944. A similar note was struck by J.D. Vance just this week in response to the Henry Nowak case, where he said that the murder of Henry Nowak and the action of the police illustrates that the current generation of European elites has abandoned its commitment to Western liberal democracy and has conceded to ideologies emanating from non-Western societies that are flooding into Europe by mass immigration, and Europe is admitting people who are opposed to the Western way of life. Not only was it Pete Hegseth, not only was it J.D. Vance who made these types of arguments, but if you listen to the podcasters, some of the most influential podcasters in the US, like Tucker Carlson, they've done numerous stories about how European society has caved in to anti-Western ideologies. And the United States has decided that they need to intervene in Europe to protect a Western way of life. Now, in a sense, there's something rather puzzling about why the United States is so interested in what goes on in Europe. Why would the United States care so much? And I think Europeans, if you read the European response on social media, it's a mixture of mind your own business. Why do you care what we do? It's our problem. But the United States has decided to make the cultural direction of Europe a central focus of US politics. And in my book, I try to explain what's going on. Why is the United States so concerned about Europe? And I think that there are three reasons that explain why the United States is so interested in Europe. Number one is that Europe is being sucked in. And when I say Europe, I include here for the moment Britain, and especially Britain, as we'll see. Europe is being sucked in to a cultural war that is being waged in the United States. It's a cultural war that pits MAGA against cosmopolitan liberal elites, as they call it. And to understand this cultural war, you have to understand for a moment the world from the perception of MAGA. So, from the perception of Trump and Vance and Hegseth and MAGA, they think, we've just won an election. We have the presidency. We have the Senate. We have the Congress. But we've just realized we don't control the United States, because the key institutions in the United States, whether universities whether the civil service, whether the judiciary, whether the media, those institutions are controlled by cosmopolitan liberal elites. These cosmopolitan liberal elites are in favor of relatively open borders, diversity, multiculturalism, and managed decline even. And if we are going to control America, we need to defeat this social group of social liberals. And in the context of that war, that cultural war, Europe is the symbol of everything that MAGA doesn't like. And so the MAGA group will say, Europe is where we do not want to go. Hexeth and Vance say, if we don't take control of the universities, if we don't take control of the judiciary, we're going to end up like Europe. And Europe for them is a version of hell. And interestingly, and this is a question I want to put to you at the end of it, London figures very prominently in this debate. London figures as a place where the streets are not safe. You can't wear a Rolex without being ripped off your wrist. You can't walk down the streets without trying to someone steal your iPhone. London is a place where Muslims are attacking liberal and Jewish people. It's just a nightmare situation. And London figures very prominently in MAGA, the MAGA worldview. So I want to explain why MAGA is so obsessed with Europe. Number one, because of this cultural war dimension of it. But there are two other reasons why MAGA is so obsessed with it. One is geopolitical and one is economic. Very quickly, on the geopolitical front, the United States is turning away from Europe. The United States thinks that the future belongs to a world of separate spheres. The Russians will have a sphere, the Chinese will have a sphere, the United States will have a sphere which will include the Americas, and Europe is a place where there is going to be competition between Russia, United States, and Europe. And if we want to control Europe, we need to reshape its culture. We need to make it compatible with what we in the MAGA world call civilizational America. We need to ensure that Europe is pro-Christian democracy, is pro a white culture, and is pro-free speech. We are horrified in the MAGA world about the extent to which Europeans are obsessed with hate speech. We need to turn them in the direction of free speech. And this is all part and parcel of a geopolitical conflict that we have with China and Russia. Third reason, above and beyond the geopolitical, there's an economic reason why we need to control Europe. We in America are very worried about restrictions on free speech because one of our most successful industries is social media. The Europeans want to regulate speech in a way that is detrimental to the interests of Facebook, of Google. They're talking about regulating AI. AI is one of our key industries. We need to ensure that Europeans do not put any restrictions in place that hurt us economically. So we are going to work very hard to limit the capacity of Europeans to limit free speech. Put all those together. That's why Mr. Hexeth, Mr. Vance are so interested in Europe. We want to ensure that Europe, and in particular Britain, becomes part and parcel of a particular type of civilizational America. And speaking as an American, I hope that you too share my commitment to wanting to join civilizational America. Thank you. I have a couple of questions, though, for you from an American perspective. What do you think many of you are either people who live in London or the London area, of this view that figures prominently in the MAGA worldview, that London is a place that, as it's become more diverse, as it's become more multicultural, has become progressively less attractive, less successful, and an unpleasant place to live. Compare London 2025 to 2005, say. Is it a better, similar, or worse place to live?
London is atypical of the rest of the UK and
Right.
fabulously wealthy.
Yes.
It hasn't noticeably declined in its wealth.
I also think the crime rates statistically have gone down in
Yeah.
London.
Right.
So
It's
you
nonsense.
can have your mobile phone stolen, I agree with
Yeah.
that. But I'm fascinated that the MAGA guys seem to be absolutely interested in the data.
Yeah.
The data about, Jane's point really, data about crime rates show that pretty much most of the things that people believe from reading the media are actually wrong.
Right.
With the possible exception of little spikes in things that are going on, like having your phone nicked. But you're much less likely to be murdered, much less likely to be burgled.
Right.
You are much safer in the streets of London than the vast majority of cities.
Your car can get stolen from outside
Yes,
your house.
yeah.
Because ours was.
Right.
Yeah.
What about general quality of life? Immeasurably worse off now than 2005? Sadiq Khan's ruined the place.
I don't think so.
No?
I think MAGA will hate me saying this, but I think it's become a more interesting place, the more diverse it's
But the standards of
In
people's
terms of
standards of
food.
living is
We
going
had this
down.
conversation earlier. I think it's improved the education system nowhere through the achievement of children in schools, through the aspirational nature of the parents coming into this country. And I think someone pointed out that the celebration of Arsenal winning the Premier League the other day in North London was the most amazing example of London at its most diverse, best, as it might, because it's a more colourful, more interesting place.
Right. What about this argument that the Henry Noack case illustrates that diversity has run amok, that the crime of racism is worse than the crime of murder?
That's all bullshit. I mean, there's no connection between the noise that's coming out of MAGA and the reality that's going on. Who in America actually really understands what has taken place in that incident? We don't even know what actually happened to cause the stabbing. We don't know to what extent the police's behaviour there was in fact a result of some diversity training rather than the
Well,
policeman
we had this discussion in the car on the way down, didn't we?
Bad, stupid policeman.
See, I disagree with that slightly, as Rod knows. I
There's all
think
sorts of
it's
assumptions
a
there.
really nuanced incident, tragic obviously. I think diversity training was part of it, because something subconsciously in those police officers' heads was saying, this bloke has said I have been racially abused and I have to deal with that. My training tells me I have to deal with that. So in the moment, they were unable to give equal weight, let alone greater weight, which is what they should have done, to a bloke saying, I am dying, I have been stabbed, get an accident.
Right.
I'm sorry, I do think training was partly behind that.
I agree with you. I also think we witness two-tier policing. I think the accusation of that is true, and I've witnessed it myself. I'm not sure it plays into the MAGA playbook the way they would like it to, but I think we are definitely witnessing a weird sort of change in the policing in this country, and a kind of tin ear from the police to how communities feel.
Right, right.
Yeah, I would agree with that up to a point. I have a relative who's a recently retired policeman, and I asking him, how does policing environment compare at the point when you're retiring to when you started? He said, well, back in the day, we thought our job was to go out and get criminals
Right.
Now our job is to not upset anybody.
Right.
That's true. That's true in all the public service industries. I'm a teacher, and as a teacher, as a nurse, as anyone in the NHS or the police or local authority, we have to go on all these diversity trainings, and that becomes the most paramount thing that you have to consider is the diversity and the sensibilities of the people that you're dealing with. It's not the rights and wrongs of individual situations. You have to size them up according to who you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And that's gone through society, I would
Well, it's
suggest.
in any big company,
Yeah.
insurance companies.
I've had unconscious bias training.
Yeah.
I've had all
Yes.
sorts of
So have
stuff.
I.
Yeah, so I-
And I accept this runs through, but I'm
Yeah.
just saying in this particular instance, we don't actually know
No, I agree with that.
what was behind the mistake made by the police.
But-
And
They,
But-
they were
but
not
we
called
do.
to they were not called to an incident where they knew there'd been a stabbing.
they didn't know.
They
no.
didn't know that, so they didn't actually know someone was injured, so they didn't act
But
with
they
the urgency.
did once they got there.
Once they got
Julie.
there,
You
they
told
know
them
it's
what,
their job
7
to check.
times?
Yes,
it's their job
but I feel
It's
that
basic lack of humanity and common sense, not to
common
And not to
sense,
believe
yes,
the phone.
but I
Remember, the
think-
phone call was from the accused, well, the person.
Yeah.
So you don't just believe what you hear. I thought the police
Yes,
had to have an
exactly,
open
yeah.
mind to what happened to anybody, whatever, you know. And they
I
didn't. Their
think
minds
the
was
MAGA
closed. I
movement
think.
see what has supposedly, that allegedly happened in London, is that very different to what's happened in New York in the same period of time, what's happened in San Francisco, Paris. I mean,
Right.
have all civilizations slightly changed in the same
Right.
way?
But-
Why they're picking on
Can I say
London?
something? So, the United States has had, in the same way that the UK has, diversity, equity, and inclusion training. We've all had it. One big difference between the US and the UK is we have a more or less absolute right of free speech. We can say anything, no matter how racist, in public and in print. And the people in the MAGA movement complain that in Europe, the limitations on free speech are so extensive that there isn't freedom to even discuss the question of whether we have too many migrants, whether we have the wrong type of migrants. Because if you were even to raise that question, you're a racist.
That's self-evidently not true, though, if you look at the current UK political landscape.
Now, not.
Now, but
years
historically, I
it's
think there is
changed
a
in the
point
last
Well, there was
2
the
years.
famous Gordon Brown moment, wasn't there?
Yes.
Where
Yeah, but
he said something he thought, but so I think you're right. That
before
has
the
changed.
last election, Starmer wouldn't have been talking about the
No.
votes in the way he has done in the last few years, and now it's become much more acceptable, and people aren't being called out as racist just to bring that up.
Yeah.
You know, just that it's not even being criticising; it's just bringing up the subject, and people are
The
now allowed
consequence
to.
of not discussing it is actually you've got a number of political entrepreneurs like Nigel Farage who've been extremely successful, probably because people weren't being honest about it.
But I would also
therefore-
challenge this idea that the law is any different in the States than it is here.
Right.
Yeah, I
you
wondered
can't say whatever you want in the States if it's going to incite violence. And the law is roughly the same here.
It is certainly the case you can't incite violence, and it is certainly the case that in a business setting or a university or in the military, you don't have freedom of speech because you would run into all sorts of restrictions. But have any of you ever thought, I would really like to speak out on this topic, but given the law and the norms of free speech, I'd better remain quiet?
No,
No. You don't feel I'm silenced.
no.
Right.
I think you feel, I'm speaking as somebody who worked for a couple of years for an American company, Google, that was very politically correct. I remember being taken aside very early on by my kind of departmental head and being told, just be very, very careful
Right.
what you say, no unguarded banter.
Right.
Because if you say the wrong thing, people will come after you and get rid of you. So that was an American company.
Okay.
I am policed by my children in this regard.
I think that's quite common.
Right.
You know, if I were to indulge in the similar sort of wayward banter that you just referred to, Julian, in front of any of my kids, they would call me out in an instant. So there is that that cascade of attitudes down through the generations, which is to some extent left us behind.
Right, right.
And also, if our laws were that draconian, Nigel Farage wouldn't be able to come out with the absolutely appalling things he does
Well, yeah.
on a very regular basis.
Right.
Could I also challenge the framing of this debate, because you've asked about London.
Yeah.
What about towns and countryside in Britain and the USA?
There's no white thing
Because
happening in London
the cultures are hugely different, more different between British capital city and big cities and the countryside and small towns, industrial towns, than London
Yeah.
is different from New York, for instance.
Yes, no.
And you would see exactly the same kind of problems going on in a small town American environment, you know, as the Henry Novak situation.
Yeah.
You know, two young men in an altercation,
Right.
something goes wrong, someone gets killed. 9 times out of 10, there isn't a homicide.
Yeah.
But you know, the overlaying of the racial element is completely spurious as far as I'm concerned.
No, absolutely right. So these cases happen all the time in the US.
Yeah.
It's very interesting that the MAGA wants to make so much out of the British case,
Yes.
Yes.
because they want to politicize Britain,
Yes.
and they want to argue this is what happens when diversity and multiculturalism
Yeah. And
runs amok.
it's got
But
nothing to do with
Vance
it.
is pontificating. He's expressing an opinion about something which has nothing to do with him. You know, this has nothing to do with
Yeah.
him or his, you know, any of them in power in the States. But he's got his eye on the presidency.
Yes.
He's speaking to the American audience.
This
Yes.
is not
isn't
free
he?
speech. I mean, we're allowed to. People talk here about things in America. I'm not defending him, but he's got a right to have views about here, hasn't he? Just as we have a lot of views about. What happens there?
Does he have
I mean,
right?
Trump
But it
is
is really
constantly
dangerous,
talked
and we
about
have
here.
a crucial by-election coming up.
Yeah,
What is
I
it,
agree
next
entirely,
week?
but I do think that they're not allowed to say anything
Trump
about
talked
here.
about by
not right.
Starmer and his deputy in the same way. And we all talk about him like that, but do people that are actually, I mean, Starmer's very careful what he says about
Well, yes, for
Trump.
obvious reasons, but I mean,
Whereas
in
they
the
don't-
past they haven't been.
they
have
don't
they?
seem to
They've
be.
been very critical of. I mean, I'm not defending them, but I mean, it works both ways. I think. You know, we do say
Well,
things about them. So
American exceptionalism
Yeah.
looms large in this in this discussion we're having
Yeah.
now.
Last question. What do you think, as British people, of the prospects of, okay, we've left Europe and our future now lies with the US? So maybe we have to swallow some of this stuff on free speech, but our real future lies with Donald Trump. And if the MAGA world continues,
I think I
we're
challenge-
still better off.
Well,
challenge
Donald
the
Trump's
premise
not
we-
going to be there for all that much longer. in
But
the scheme
JD
of
Vance
things.
might be, Peter Hegseth might be.
I challenge the premise. I mean, we may have left the EU. You said Europe. By geographical fact, we can never leave Europe. We're a European country,
Right.
and almost certainly we're going to have to cooperate with our European partners on defence and things like that.
Well, when Nigel Farage is our Prime Minister,
Right.
there might be a different shift in the way the UK respects or interacts with America, but there'll be a certain proportion of us who would never accept that.
So the idea of Britain as the 51st state doesn't appeal.
Not to us,
No?
but
no,
maybe
Canada
to a
will
proportion of the
join us,
UK
don't we?
population. Yeah.
Esther
No
White,
takers?
I say no.
So they want us to.
Thank you. Right.